Shalom, and welcome to Shmu's Views, Torah Observant Judaism. I'm Shmuel ben Shlomi, and I'd like to welcome you to our YouTube channel. Before we get started, I'd like to encourage you to hit that subscribe button and also the notification bell so that when new videos get posted on our channel, you'll be notified that they have been posted. Also, if you could hit that thumbs up, the like button, I would appreciate that as well. That helps our algorithm, helps get the videos out to other people, and make our presence known on the internet. Also, I'd like to encourage you to visit our website. The link to that will be in the description below for this video. Today we're going to be looking at a couple of parshas, so that this lesson will be a little bit longer than our previous ones. We're going to be looking at Parsha Toledot, which is located in Genesis chapter 25, verses 19 through 28:9, and also Parshat Yetse, which is in Genesis 28:10 through 32:3. We'll be looking at the lives of, post-Avraham, the lives of his son and grandson, who would continue the promise of Hashem for the Jewish people. So first we're going to look at the story of Yitzhak. And this is where the story of the Jewish people now moves on from Avraham being the central figure to his son and grandsons, Yitzhak, Yakov, and Esav, now taking center stage. While the Torah mainly concentrates on the patriarchs, it is important to note that the matriarchs played a pivotal role in the development of the Jewish people and also had the ear of Hashem. God communicated with them as well. The women of God were central to the love and plan of Hashem. The Torah says about Rivka, the wife of Yitzhak, that while she was pregnant, but the children struggled in her womb, and Rivka said, "If so, why do I exist?" The pain must have been quite unbearable at times. She went to inquire of Adonai, and the Lord answered her, and he told her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." The eldest, by a matter of minutes, grew to be a great hunter who spent most of his time in the wilderness areas hunting wild game, while the younger son hung out with mom and dad, herding and taking care of the household business. Esau was the hunter, while Yakov was the overseer of the family farming and shepherding enterprise. In the Torah, there are two prominent hunters of renown mentioned. They were both haughty, rugged men of more earthly intentions, whose ways and attitudes were not at all pleasing to Hashem. Coarse men, but powerful. They were Nimrod, also known as Gilgamesh, from the empire of Sumeria. He was the first king of Samaria. And Esav, the son of Yitzhak, our father, who was also a great man. Isaac, however, or Yitzhak, unlike his son Esav, found favor in the sight of Hashem for reasons we will point to later in this teaching. But Yitzhak did have one real character flaw. He favored his eldest son Esav despite the character traits he saw in him, which were quite obvious. Why? Well, because of his human weakness, for the overwhelming desire for the taste of cooked wild game, which Esav was a master at preparing. Today we would call him a master chef. This lust for meat became great in Yitzhak's old age when he had become practically blind. If it hadn't been for Rivka, his only wife of many years, Yitzhak would have handed over the blessing of the firstborn to Esav instead of Yakov, whom God had intended all along to have that blessing. But Yitzhak was going to give it to Esav because he liked his son's cooking. Game was in his mouth, according to the Torah. So why did Rivka favor Yakov over her son Esav? She loved them both. They were equally her sons. But her favor rested on Yakov because of the revelation of Hashem to her while they were both still struggling in her womb. not because of some human weakness like her husband had to appease his physical appetite for food. The future promise for the offspring of Abraham was unimportant to his grandson Esav, as displayed by his total disregard for his birthright of the firstborn. Esav was willing to trade it off for a measly bowl of lentil soup, just to satisfy his physical craving of hunger. Of that he and his father Yitzhak may have had somewhat in common. This agrees with the words of David in the Psalms, "When I was in the womb, you knew me." God knew the character traits of Esav. He knew how those traits would be displayed before he was even born. Thus Esav spurned his birthright. The Torah teaches us that Yitzhak is the only patriarch that never left the land of Canaan. When he was younger, his father Avraham forbid it, when it came time to seek a wife from his kinsman back in Haran. And now that he is old, God commands him to never leave, even in the midst of famine in the area. The Lord had appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Mizraim, to Egypt. Stay in the land which I point out to you." Because Yitzhak heeded Hashem's word, the covenant between God and Abraham has now been enjoined to him. "Reside in this land," God said, "and I will be with you and bless you. I will assign all these lands to you and to your heirs, fulfilling the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your heirs as numerous as the stars of the heavens, and assign to your heirs all these lands, so that all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your heirs. Inasmuch as Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my laws, and my teachings." So Yitzhak stayed in Gerar. In the midst of this famine that had gripped all of Canaan, God blessed Yitzhak's crops 100-fold, mainly because he listened to the promise and believed God and stayed in the land. Prosperity can and will cause some to envy and want to hurt you. One's response to such treatment requires great wisdom, which, fortunately, Yitzhak displayed when the Hittites surrounding him wished his success and prosperity for their own. As the wise King Solomon pronounced in his book Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, "There is a time for peace and a time for war, a time to sow and a time to reap, a time to stay and a time to move on." Yitzhak realized it was time to move on, a bit further away from the Hittites surrounding him. Regardless of the time, Hashem remains with the faithful. That night the Lord appeared to him, to Yitzhak, and said to him, "I am the God of your father Avraham. Fear not, I am with you, and I will bless you and increase your offspring for the sake of my servant Avraham." Usually, if an enemy, a nation, or a person is unable to defeat you, bully you into submission, or after trying various means of persuasion to cause you to submit to their will, they will finally give up and confer to make a peace treaty with you. That is what eventually took place between King Abimelech of the Hittites and Yitzhak. See Genesis chapter 26, verses 26 through 31. At the age of 40, we now turn to Esau for a minute. At the age of 40, Esau once again shows his total disdain and disrespect and contempt for the covenant between his father and Hashem by marrying 2 Hittite women instead of those from his own people in the area of Haran, as his father Yitzhak did. Esau is now fully disqualified from having any portion in the promise of God to his grandfather Avraham and his father Yitzhak. He is officially cut off from his people. See Genesis chapter 26, verses 34 and 35. Now, even though it has been plainly shown to Yitzhak the hatred his son Esau has for the covenant promise, in his old age and physical blindness, which can be seen as a parallel for his spiritual blinders, as it relates to his son Esau, Yitzhak is still willing to pass on the blessing of the firstborn to Esau. Yitzhak has more than just physical blindness at this point. But again, faithful Rivka, being obedient to the revelation Hashem given to her concerning her son Yakov, comes to the rescue with a plan to usurp Yitzhak's misguided behavior. See Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 through 13. It is here we have a paradox found throughout the Torah and the Tanakh as it relates to the beginnings of the family of Abraham. That contention is deception. Abraham used it with Pharaoh by saying Sarah was his sister and not his wife, even though technically and legally she was his half-sister. Yitzhak did the same with King Abimelech concerning his wife Rivkah, and now deception is being used against Yitzhak by Rivkah and her son Yakov. Much further down the road in time, we have the recounting of David using a tactic of deception by feigning madness in the city gates belonging to Achish, the king of Gath, so his life would be spared. In all of these cases, Hashem doesn't correct or chastise the deceivers. Why not? Because their deceptions were clothed in a robe of righteous faithfulness to the covenant promise and the commands of God. In every case, the deceit performed was to ensure and protect the outcome of the eternal promise of God that he gave through the patriarchs, the matriarchs, and the Davidic royal line. Israel would become a great people, and that would be used by Hashem to bring light and the Torah to the entire world. His commandments, with the intentions and minds of men and pathway for the coming of Mashiach, son of David, to Jerusalem in the end of days. If anyone in that chain of events had failed or faltered in ensuring that future outcome, then the world would have been forever steeped in darkness, fit only for eternal destruction and judgment by the great judge of eternity. Therefore, I think a little bit of deception on the part of our fathers and mothers in the past to keep God's oath and covenant alive was more than fine. In fact, it was a display of righteousness. Once the firstborn blessing had been bestowed on his younger son, Yakov, his father Yitzhak realized and accepted it was God's will. So, as the new progenitor of the covenant, he blesses Yakov and sends him off to Haran to find a wife from the family of Avraham to continue that unbroken promise. So Yitzhak sent for Yakov and blessed him. He instructed him, saying, "You shall not take a wife from among the Canaanite women. You get up, go to Padan Aram, or Haran, to the house of Bethel, your mother's father, and take a wife there from among the daughters of Lavon, your mother's brother. May El Shaddai bless you, make you fertile and numerous, so that you become an assembly of peoples. May he grant the blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring, that you may possess the land where you are sojourning, which God assigned to Abraham." Then Yitzhak sent Yakov off, and he went to Haran, to Lavon, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rivkah, the mother of Yakov, and Esav. We now want to move on to the story of Jacob, or Yaakov, as he has now left for the land of Haran to find a wife among his kinsmen. So the promise of Adonai given to Avraham and Yitzhak is now given directly from Hashem to Yaakov in a dreamlike setting. While on the road, Yaakov is taking a nap. It's nighttime, and he's tired. He's been traveling all day. And he sets up a rock as a pillow, and he goes to take a nap. And when that happens, God visits him in a dreamlike setting. But there's an added promise is given to Yaakov that was not specifically passed on to his grandfather Avraham or his father Yitzhak. It is so important that Hashem implicitly tells Yaakov to, quote, remember it. God said to him, "I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Genesis 28:15. Yaakov is so shaken by this encounter, he sets up a pillar stone, anoints it with oil, and renames the place Bethel, or Bethel, meaning house of God. Many think that what Yaakov says next indicates his lack of trust in the promise of Hashem to him during this dream state because of the number of times he says if. In my opinion, he isn't questioning the promise per se, but how it was delivered in a dream state. You have to remember Yaakov had never experienced a direct revelation from Adonai before this time. That privilege had been reserved for his grandfather, his father, and his mother. Now it has happened to him, And of course, he may question within himself the validity of it, not the contents of the dream, but his own interpretation of it. Therefore, all the ifs in verses 20 through 22. His sincerity, however, cannot be questioned, since he made a vow before Adonai after this. In his time, vows were sacred things, as they should be in ours. A vow is never taken or given lightly, and always remain binding on the one who takes it. Vows were never taken or given in vain. There are parallels here between the story of Yitzhak and his son Yakov, in which their future wives were shepherdesses and were found watering their flocks at a well. When Avraham's servant met Rivkah, he gave her gold bracelets and a nose ring. When Yakov meets his future wife, Rachel, he gives her a kiss. In both cases, it is Lavon that runs out to the well to meet them and bring them back to the house. The big difference is the servant of Abraham all those years earlier insisted on staying only a night, while Yakov remained for a full month, giving Lavon the opportunity to strike a one-sided deal with his nephew, Yakov. Lavon knew the reason Yakov had come to his house, to see him and his kinsmen, and he also knew Yakov loved his youngest daughter, Rachel. So his plan of trickery was about to begin. You know, we know from the past telling of Yakov and how he tricked his brother twice, once out of the birthright over a bowl of beans, basically, and once as a result he got the blessing of the firstborn, which means he got the inheritance. So Yakov was by nature a trickster himself, having tricked his brother out of the birthright, and then along with his mother tricked his father into giving him the blessing of the firstborn. But Yakov was a rank amateur compared to his uncle Lavon. He agreed to work for 7 years for Lavon to gain Rachel as his wife. Once completed, his uncle throws a big party, gets Yakov drunk, and sends in a veiled Leah, his oldest unmarried daughter, to his nephew. In the morning, Yakov is infuriated with his uncle for deceiving him. The great deceiver gets deceived. Lavon brushes off the complaint, stating that it is their custom that the oldest daughter must be married before the younger. Now, in later Judaism, this is called a mintaj, a law that says a local custom or tradition must be observed by a visiting outsider, so long as that custom or tradition does not violate any of the 613 commandments found in Torah. Lavon then strikes a new deal with Yakov. He says, "Serve me another 7 years, and I will give you Rachel to wed immediately upon the completion of the 1 week of bridal privilege with Leah." Yaakov's love for Rachel was so great that he agrees to it. Over time, Rachel proves to be barren, whereas Leah is fruitful and gives Yakov 4 sons. This causes envy and strife to develop between the two sisters to the point of competition. It also causes friction between Rachel and Yakov. Thus begins the great conception race. You've heard of that show, The Great Race. Well, this is the great conception race between Rachel and Leah, and they begin handing their maidservants over to Yakov in much the same way Sarah did to Avraham with her servant Hagar. That was a custom then. It was an accepted practice in those days. As a result, a total of 12 sons and 1 daughter was born to Yakov. In that era, along with the wives and the servants, a size of that family would have been like a small village. See Genesis chapter 30, verses 1 through 24. So after all those years of service, Yakov and his wives were ready to move on and move away from Lavon. But Lavon had also grown wealthy and grown in stature, thanks to his nephew's service, so he was a bit reluctant to let him go, to say the least. However, it was now time again for Yaakov's trickster nature to resurface, and he devised a plan that would not only increase his own wealth and power, while at the same time diminishing that of his uncle and Lavon's sons, causing enmity between them, making it possible for Yakov to take his own small village and massive flocks back to his own home in Canaan. See Genesis chapter 30, verse 25 through 31, verse 3. Now, Yakov could have had a clean getaway if not for the fact that Rachel stole her father's statues, the statues of his gods, likely the Anunnaki idol of Nannar-Sin, whom his ancestor Terah, Abraham's father, may have served as a priest in the ziggurat of Haran several decades earlier. Why she took them, especially knowing that her husband did not serve these false gods, we may never know for sure. See Genesis 31:17 through 42. But as I had stated in an earlier portion of the Torah, when those who wish to harm you or take advantage of you ultimately fail, they usually will end up wanting to make a peace treaty with you, which is exactly what happens between Lavon and Yakov. Having tracked them down, and thanks to the trickery of Rachel herself, not found the household gods in their possession, and after listening to Yaakov's rational rant against him, as well as having been forewarned by Hashem not to harm Yaakov or all that was his, Lavon says to Yakov, "Come then, let us make a pact, you and I, that there may be a witness between you and me." Genesis 31:44. Now, once the treaty was ratified by an animal sacrifice, the following morning each went their separate ways after a long and tearful goodbye. Lavon back to Haran, and Yakov with his village of people, servants, and flocks to Canaan. Along the way, he encounters messages from Hashem, Adonai's way of letting him know that he was on the correct path of destiny. See Genesis 32:1 through 3. Next time, Yakov meets that destiny head on, and we'll take a look at that next time. Until then, Baruch Hashem, God bless you, and shalom.